The Galactic Covenant had ruled the stars for 12 million years. Their 7 founding species were worshipped as living gods by every younger civilization in the known universe. They had brought peace to 1,000 worlds. They had ended wars that lasted centuries. They had lifted primitive species from darkness and given them the gift of technology. No one questioned the Covenant. No one doubted their wisdom. They were eternal. They were perfect. They were gods. But gods have secrets. Deep within the central archives of the Covenant homeworld, a young archivist named Velith was doing something forbidden. She was reading files that had been sealed for 3,000 years. The classification markers on these files were unlike anything she had ever seen. Most restricted documents carried warnings about military secrets or diplomatic sensitivities. These files carried only 2 words: Containment Protocol. Velith was a member of the Ethery species, beings of light and energy who served the Covenant as record keepers. Her people were known for their curiosity, and today that curiosity had led her somewhere dangerous. The first file contained coordinates for a small, yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The system had been marked as quarantined. No ships were permitted within 50 light years. No communications were allowed. The entire region had been erased from standard navigation charts. Velith opened the next file and found images of a planet. It was a terrifying world. The gravity was crushing, nearly 10 times what her own species could survive. The atmosphere was a volatile mixture of oxygen and nitrogen that would poison most galactic life forms. The temperature swings were extreme, ranging from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. Predators filled every environment. Diseases evolved faster than they could be cured. Natural disasters. Struck with regularity, the Covenant scientists who had first surveyed this world had given it a classification that Velith had only read about in ancient texts. They called it a death world. But the truly disturbing discovery came in the next file. This death world was not empty. Despite every possible obstacle, intelligent life had evolved there. A species called humans had somehow survived the endless horrors of their planet and built a civilization. Velith read the assessment reports with growing unease. The humans were unlike anything the Covenant had encountered. They did not simply adapt to their environment. They changed their environment to suit their needs. They had tamed fire before they had proper tools. They had domesticated predators that should have eaten them. They had survived ice ages, plagues, disasters that would have ended most species. Most alarming was their rate of advancement. The Covenant measured civilizational progress in millions of years. The humans had gone from primitive agriculture to nuclear weapons in less than 10,000 years. They had reached their moon within a single century of discovering powered flight. They were already building machines that could think. The assessment concluded with a recommendation that made Velith stop breathing. The humans were too dangerous to be allowed into the galactic community. They advanced too quickly. They were too aggressive. They were too adaptable. If they reached the stars, they would destabilize everything the Covenant had built. The solution was documented in clinical detail. The Covenant had deployed their most advanced technology, devices that could bend reality itself. They had created an invisible barrier around the human solar system, cutting them off from the rest of the universe. Every signal that might have reached them was blocked. Every probe they sent was quietly destroyed. As far as the humans knew, they were alone in a vast and empty cosmos. The Covenant had imprisoned an entire species because they feared what they might become. Velith felt sick as she read the final entries. The barrier had been designed to last forever, powered by the energy of the human's own sun. The Covenant had condemned billions of thinking beings to eternal isolation, and then they had simply forgotten about them. But the last notation in the file changed everything. It was dated just 6 months ago. It's added by an automated monitoring system. The message was brief and terrifying. Barrier integrity had fallen to 2.3%. Cause unknown. The humans had somehow been eroding the barrier from within. Estimated time until complete failure. Imminent. Velith closed the file and sat in the darkness of the archive for a long moment. She had uncovered something that could shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The gods had lied. The gods had imprisoned innocents. And now, those innocents were about to break free. She knew she should report this through proper channels. She knew she should trust the wisdom of the Covenant leadership. But something in those files haunted her. The images of humans struggling against their deadly world. The records of their persistence, their creativity, their refusal to surrender to impossible odds. They had spent 3,000 years believing they were alone in the universe. And still, they had reached for the stars. What kind of species does that? What kind of spirit survives such isolation without breaking? Before Velith could decide what to do with her discovery, alarms began sounding throughout the Covenant homeworld. Emergency frequencies crackled with panicked transmissions. Military commanders shouted orders. Ships that had been dormant for centuries powered up their engines. Something had breached the barrier around Earth. Velith rushed to the nearest observation center and joined the crowd of shocked Covenant officials staring at the display screens. The readings made no sense. A vessel had emerged from the quarantine zone, a vessel of human design. It was not built from any known materials. Its energy signature was completely foreign, and it was heading directly toward Covenant space. High Arbiter Koss, the Supreme Commander of Covenant forces, appeared on the primary display. His ancient face was troubled in a way Velith had never seen. This was a being who had ruled fleets for millions of years, who had crushed rebellions and ended wars. Now he looked almost afraid. All vessels converge on the emergence point, he commanded. This is a containment protocol breach. Lethal force is authorized. Velith watched as hundreds of Covenant warships moved to intercept the single human vessel. The fleet was overwhelming, enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Against such force, the human ship should have been insignificant. But it did not flee. It did not attempt to hide. Instead, it continued on its course, broadcasting a message on frequencies that had not been used in 3,000 years. The message was simple. It was just a greeting, an announcement of peaceful intentions, and a request for communication. The humans did not know yet what had been done to them. They did not know that the gods of the galaxy had imprisoned them out of fear. They had finally broken free of their cage, and their first instinct was to say hello. Velith felt tears forming in her eyes. These creatures had every right to emerge from their prison with weapons blazing, filled with righteous anger. Instead, they came offering friendship to a universe that had abandoned them. The Covenant fleet surrounded the human vessel, weapons locked and ready. High Arbiter Koss demanded immediate surrender. The humans were in violation of sacred protocols, he declared. They would return to their world and submit to isolation, or they would be destroyed. The human response came from someone called Captain Amara, Chen. Her voice was calm despite the impossible odds. She spoke clearly in a language the translation systems had to work hard to process. We spent 3,000 years believing we were alone, she said. 3,000 years dreaming of this moment, of finally knowing that we are not the only thinking beings in the universe. We mourned a cosmos that seemed empty and uncaring. We are not going back to that loneliness. Whatever happens next, we are not going back. The transmission ended. The standoff continued. And across the galaxy, younger species who had only ever known the Covenant as benevolent protectors began to ask uncomfortable questions. Why would the gods hide an entire species? What threat could these small creatures possibly pose? And somewhere in the archives, Velith made her decision. She began copying every file she could find about the human containment. The truth would come out. One way or another, the truth would come out. The forgotten children had returned, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. When the Deathworlders rose again, even the gods of the galaxy trembled. Part 2. First Contact Redux. Captain Amara. Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched the alien warships surround her vessel. There were hundreds of them, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their weapons glowed with energies that her sensors could barely comprehend. By any reasonable calculation, her ship should have been destroyed in seconds. But Amara had not come this far by being reasonable. 3,000 years ago, Humanity had been imprisoned without knowing it. They had looked up at the stars and wondered why no one answered their signals. They had sent probes into the void and watched them disappear without explanation. Generation after generation had lived and died believing that the universe was empty, that humanity was alone in all of creation. It was the greatest lie ever told. When human scientists finally detected the barrier's energy signature, everything changed. It took them 50 years to understand what they were seeing. Another 100 years to develop technology that could interact with it. The barrier was not a natural phenomenon. It was artificial. Someone had deliberately cut humanity off from the rest of the universe. The discovery should have filled humanity with despair. Instead, it filled them with determination. If someone had gone to such lengths to contain them, then there was something out there worth reaching. The stars were not empty. They were forbidden. The Prometheus was built for one purpose: to break through whatever was holding humanity back. Its hull was reinforced to withstand forces that would crush normal materials. Its engines could generate power levels that bordered on the impossible. Its crew was selected from the best humanity had to offer. Men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment, when they finally punched through the barrier. Amara had expected many things. She had expected alien vessels, strange new worlds, perhaps even hostile first contact. What she had not expected was the sheer scale of what awaited them. The Covenant fleet that surrounded her represented more firepower than humanity had accumulated in its entire history. High Arbiter. Koss appeared on her communication screen. He was an ancient being, his species one of the founding members of the Covenant. His face was stern, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Human vessel," he declared, "you have violated sacred containment protocols established by the Galactic Covenant. You will power down your engines and prepare for escort back to your designated quarantine zone. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination." Amara studied the alien commander for a long moment. She had spent her whole life wondering what this moment would feel like. Now that it had arrived, she felt surprisingly calm. "Containment protocols," she repeated. "So it was deliberate. You knew we were there. You knew we were reaching for the stars. And you locked us away." "The reasons for your containment are not your concern," Koss replied. "You will comply, or you will be destroyed." "I think the reasons are exactly my concern," Amara said. "My species spent 3,000 years in isolation. We watched our children grow up believing they were alone in the universe. Though we buried our elders knowing they would never see the stars they dreamed about. You owe us an explanation." Koss did not answer immediately. Something flickered across his ancient face, an emotion that Amara could not quite identify. When he spoke again, his voice was slightly less certain. "Your species was deemed too dangerous for integration into galactic society. Your rate of advancement was destabilizing. Your aggressive tendencies posed an unacceptable risk. The containment was necessary for the greater good." Amara nodded slowly. "I see. And who decided this? Who gave you the right to judge an entire species before we had a chance to prove ourselves? The Covenant has maintained galactic peace for 12 million years. We do not answer to primitive species who cannot comprehend the complexities of interstellar civilization." "Primitive," Amara repeated. She turned to her communications officer. "Lieutenant, broadcast our historical database on all frequencies. Let them see what this primitive species has survived." The transmission went out across every channel, reaching not just the Covenant fleet, but every vessel and station within range. It showed humanity's history in brutal detail. The ice ages that had nearly frozen them to extinction. The plagues that had killed hundreds of millions. The wars they had fought against each other when they had no external enemies to face. The natural disasters, the famines, the countless near-extinction events. And through it all, the persistence. The refusal to die. The endless reaching toward something better. "You locked us away because you feared what we might become," Amara said when the transmission ended. "But you did not understand us. We do not break when faced with hardship. We do not surrender when the odds are against us. 3,000 years of isolation did not diminish us. It made us stronger." She stood from her command chair and walked closer to the screen. looking directly into the eyes of the alien commander. "We are not asking for your permission to join the galactic community. We are not begging for acceptance. We are here, and we are staying. You can welcome us as friends, or you can try to push us back into our cage. But I promise you this, we will never go quietly." The transmission ended. Standoff continued. But something unexpected was happening across the galaxy. The historical broadcast had been received by more than just the Covenant fleet. Younger species, civilizations that had been uplifted by the Covenant millennia ago, were watching with fascination. The Velesi were a species of insectoid traders who had built their entire culture around commerce and negotiation. They watched the human broadcast and saw a species that understood the value of persistence, that had learned to cooperate even when resources were scarce. The Thrax were proud warriors who had served as the Covenant's military arm for millions of years. They watched the human broadcast and saw a species that had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. The combat footage from human history showed tactics that the Thrax had never considered, desperate strategies born from fighting against superior forces. The crystalline minds were ancient artificial intelligences who had observed the galaxy for eons without taking sides. They watched the human broadcast and detected something remarkable in the human neural patterns. These creatures thought differently than any species they had encountered. Their minds were chaotic, creative, adaptive, in ways that should have been impossible. None of these species said anything publicly. The Covenant was too powerful to openly challenge. But in private channels and encrypted communications, questions began to spread. Why had the Covenant hidden an entire species? What threat could these humans possibly pose to a civilization that had ruled the stars for 12 million years? And if the Covenant had imprisoned humanity, what else might they be hiding? On the Prometheus, Amara received word that Covenant reinforcements were arriving. The fleet surrounding her vessel was growing larger by the hour. Whatever happened next, it would set the course for humanity's future in the galaxy. Her first officer approached with concern on his face. "Captain, we cannot fight our way out of this." "We do not have the firepower." Amara smiled slightly. "I know. We were never going to win with weapons." "Then what is your plan?" "We are going to do what humans have always done when faced with superior force. We're going to make friends, build alliances, and change the rules of the game." She opened a new communication channel, its time directed not at the Covenant, but at the other vessels she had detected on the edge of the system. Merchant ships, explorer vessels, civilian transports from a dozen different species. "This is Captain Amara Chen of the human vessel Prometheus. We come in peace, seeking friendship and mutual understanding with all species. We have been isolated for 3,000 years, and we have much to learn about the galaxy. But we also have much to offer. If anyone is willing to talk, we are willing to listen." For a long moment, there was silence. The Covenant fleet maintained its threatening posture. High Arbiter Koss watched with cold disapproval. Then a response came through. It was from a Velesi trading vessel, their captain's voice curious and bold. "Human vessel. This is the merchant ship Prophet's Promise. We have watched your broadcast with great interest. Would very much like to talk." More responses followed.
The Thrax wanted to know more about human combat techniques.
The crystalline minds requested a direct neural interface to study human thought patterns. Species that had been silent for millennia began, reaching out to these strange newcomers from the Deathworld. Amara looked at the communication logs, filling her screen, and allowed herself a moment of hope. Humanity had been imprisoned by gods, but gods could be challenged, not with weapons or anger, but with something far more powerful: connection, understanding, the simple desire to not be alone. The standoff was far from over. Something had shifted in the galaxy. The Forgotten Children had announced their presence, and the universe was listening. When the Deathworlders rose again, even the gods of the galaxy trembled. Part 3. The cracks in Heaven Veleth had committed treason, and she did not regret it. The files she had discovered in the Covenant archives told a story that the galaxy needed to hear. For 3 days, she worked in secret, copying every document related to the human containment. She found research reports, military assessments, and council deliberations stretching back 3,000 years. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. On the fourth day, she released everything to the Galactic Network. The response was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the story had spread to every corner of civilized space. The Covenant, the benevolent gods who had guided the galaxy for 12 million years, had imprisoned an entire species out of fear. They had condemned billions of thinking beings to eternal isolation without trial or judgment, but that was not the worst of it. As Velith dug deeper into the archives, she had found other files, older files that documented 17 other species that had been deemed too dangerous for the galactic community. The Covenant had not simply imprisoned them, they had erased them completely, species after species, stretching back millions of years. Whenever a civilization showed too much potential, whenever they advanced too quickly or displayed tendencies that the Covenant found threatening, they were quietly eliminated. Their worlds were sterilized, their histories were erased. Their very existence was removed from galactic memory. Humanity was not special. They were simply the latest in a long line of victims, and the only ones who had survived long enough to break free. The younger species reacted with shock and horror. For millions of years, they had trusted the Covenant to guide them. They had believed in the wisdom of the gods. Now they learned that their protectors were not saviors, but predators, pruning the garden of civilizations to maintain their own dominance. High Arbiter. Cause called an emergency summit of the Covenant leadership. The 7 founding species gathered in their ancient council chamber, surrounded by displays showing the growing unrest across the galaxy. "This is a catastrophe," declared one of the council members. "The younger species are losing faith in our authority. There are protests on 100 worlds. Some are demanding that the humans be welcomed into galactic society." "Then we must act quickly," Koss replied. "The humans must be eliminated before they can spread their contamination further. Once they are gone, we can restore order." "And what of the leaked files?" asked another council member. "The evidence of our past eliminations is now public knowledge. How do we explain that?" "We deny everything. We claim the files were fabricated by enemies seeking to undermine galactic stability. The younger species will believe what they want to believe. They always have." And not everyone on the council agreed. A faction led by Elder Sirith argued for a different approach. The old ways had failed, they said. The containment had not held. The secrets had not remained hidden. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge their mistakes and find a new path forward. Koss dismissed them as weak and naive. The Covenant had maintained order for 12 million years by being strong and decisive. They would not abandon that approach because of one escaped species and some uncomfortable revelations. While the Covenant debated, humanity was not standing still. The Prometheus had become the center of a growing movement. Ships from a dozen species gathered around the human vessel. Eager to learn more about these strange newcomers from the Death World, Captain Amara Chen proved to be a skilled diplomat. She welcomed every visitor with genuine warmth and curiosity. She answered their questions honestly, even when the answers made humanity look less than perfect. She shared human history with all its violence and mistakes, but also its triumphs and its endless capacity for growth. The Valesi traders were the first to propose formal relations. They offered trade agreements and technology exchanges. In return, they wanted access to human markets and the opportunity to study human innovation methods. Amara agreed, and the first interspecies commerce in 3,000 years began. The Thrax warriors came next. They challenged human soldiers to combat trials, expecting easy victories against creatures from such a small and weak-looking species. They were shocked when humans matched them blow for blow. The Death World had not produced fragile beings. It had forged survivors. General Marcus Torres became the primary liaison with the Thrax military. He had spent his career studying combat tactics from every era of human history, and he proved to be a gifted teacher. The Thrax were fascinated by human guerrilla warfare, by the concept of asymmetric combat, by the idea that a weaker force could defeat a stronger one through clever tactics and determination. Your ancestors fought against impossible odds and won, a Thrax commander observed after watching recordings of historical human battles. They did not have superior weapons or numbers. They had only their will to survive. That is the human way, Torres replied. We do not accept defeat easily. When pushed, we push back harder. The crystalline minds sent representatives as well, though their interest was more abstract. They had observed countless species over billions of years, but they had never encountered minds quite like humanity's. Human thoughts were chaotic and unpredictable. Human creativity seemed to emerge from nowhere, generating solutions that logic alone could never produce. You think differently than any species we have studied, the crystalline minds reported. Your neural patterns show constant adaptation, constant reinvention. It is as if your minds are designed to overcome obstacles that do not yet exist. Mara smiled at the observation. We call it hope. We imagine better futures and then work to make them real. It is how we survived our death world. It is how we broke through the barrier. It is how we will build a place for ourselves in this galaxy. As days turned into weeks, the coalition around the Prometheus grew larger. Species that had been loyal to the Covenant for millions of years began sending unofficial observers. They watched humanity with a mixture of fear and admiration. These creatures were small and short-lived, but they possessed something remarkable. They were not afraid of the gods. Velith joined the coalition openly. Her treason now a badge of honor among those who had lost faith in the Covenant. She brought with her the remaining archive she had managed to copy, including technical documents that humanity's scientists eagerly studied. Why did you help us? Amara asked her during one of their many conversations. You had everything to lose by revealing the truth. Velith considered the question carefully. I spent my whole life believing in the Covenant. I believed they were wise and just and good. When I discovered the truth, I could not unsee it. I could not pretend that imprisoning an innocent species was acceptable. I could not ignore the deaths of 17 civilizations. She looked at Amara with eyes that glowed like starlight. You humans have a word for what I felt. You call it conscience. The Covenant taught us to obey without question. You taught me to question without fear. The coalition was growing stronger every day, but Amara knew that the real test was still coming. The Covenant would not simply accept their diminishing authority. They had ruled the galaxy for 12 million years, and they would fight to maintain that rule. She was right to worry. High Arbiter Kos had grown tired of debate and diplomacy. If the younger species would not remain loyal through faith, they would remain loyal through fear. He activated a protocol that had not been used in 8 million years. Deep in Covenant space, ancient weapons began powering up. These were not ordinary warships. They were planet killers, devices capable of destroying entire worlds in seconds. They had been built in a darker age. When the Covenant had first risen to power by eliminating all who opposed them, the first target was not Earth. It was the Velesi homeworld. They had been the first to ally with humanity. They would be the first to pay the price. A message went out across the galaxy, broadcast on every frequency. The voice of High Arbiter Kos was cold and absolute. Let this serve as a warning to all who would challenge the natural order. The humans are a contamination that must be cleansed. Any species that offers them aid or comfort will share their fate. The Velesi have made their choice. Now they will face the consequences. The weapon was already moving toward its target. The Velesi had hours to evacuate billions of citizens from their homeworld. The coalition was too small and too scattered to mount a defense. Amara looked at the tactical displays showing the approaching doom and made a decision. If this was going to be humanity's first real test in the galaxy, they would face it the way they had faced every challenge in their history. They would fight. They would adapt. And they would not abandon their friends. When the Deathworlders rose again, even the gods of the galaxy trembled. Part 4. When gods wage war, the Covenant planet killer was a nightmare made real. It stretched across space like a dark moon, bristling with weapons that could crack a world in half. For 8 million years, it had drifted in silent storage, waiting for a day when the Covenant's absolute authority would be challenged. That day had come. Captain Mara Chen watched the weapon approach on her tactical display and felt a cold weight settle in her chest. The Valesi homeworld held 12 billion souls. They had been the first species to reach out to humanity, the first to offer friendship instead of fear. Now they were going to die because of that friendship, unless humanity could stop it. "How long until the weapon reaches firing range?" she asked her tactical officer. 14 hours, Captain. The Valesi evacuation has begun, but their transport capacity is limited. At best, they can save perhaps 200 million before the weapon arrives. 200 million out of 12 billion? Less than 2%. The rest would be vaporized in an instant. Their lives ended because they had chosen to believe in something better than fear. Amara made a decision. "Signal all coalition vessels. We are moving to intercept the planet killer." Her first officer stared at her in disbelief. "Captain, our combined fleet cannot match that weapon's firepower. We would be throwing our lives away. And we throw our lives away standing between that weapon and innocent people. That is what humanity does. That is who we are." The coalition fleet gathered around the Prometheus. There were Valesi, trading ships hastily armed with whatever weapons could be mounted. There were Thrax warships whose crews had broken with the Covenant to follow their new human allies. There were vessels from a dozen other species, all of them small and outgunned. All of them refusing to stand aside, they moved to intercept the planet killer with 14 hours to develop a plan. Human engineers worked through the night alongside their alien counterparts. They studied the weapon's design, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. They modified shield generators and weapon systems, pushing technology beyond its intended limits. They argued and calculated and improvised. This was what humans did best. They faced impossible problems and refused to accept that there was no solution. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A young Valesi engineer named Churik had been studying human history and stumbled across something remarkable. Humans had faced planet-killing threats before. Asteroids, supervolcanoes, nuclear weapons. Each time they had found ways to survive. "Your species thinks about destruction differently," Churik explained. "Most species see a threat and try to avoid it. You see a threat and look for ways to turn it against itself." The idea sparked a chain of inspiration. Human tactical officers worked with Thrax warriors and crystalline mind strategists. They developed a plan that no sane military commander would attempt. It required perfect timing, absolute coordination, and a willingness to sacrifice everything. It was exactly the kind of plan that humans had been using to survive impossible odds for thousands of years. When the planet killer entered the Valesi system, it found the coalition fleet waiting. The ships were arranged in a strange formation, spread wide across space in a pattern that made no tactical sense. "Hi, Arbiter Koss," watched from his command vessel and felt a moment of contempt. These primitives did not even understand basic military positioning. Their fleet would be swept aside. It's like dust before a storm. He ordered the attack to begin. The coalition ships scattered as Covenant weapons opened fire. They fled in all directions, seemingly panicked and disorganized. Koss allowed himself a cold smile. The humans had talked boldly, but when faced with real power, it ran like all the others. Then something unexpected happened. The fleeing coalition ships were not running away. They were positioning themselves around the planet killer in a precise geometric pattern. Before Koss could understand what was happening, they activated their modified shield generators in perfect synchronization. The shields did not protect the coalition ships. Instead, they created a massive interference field that wrapped around the planet killer like a net. Energy crackled across the weapon's surface as its systems began to malfunction. Koss shouted orders to his crew. "Destroy the shield generators. Break the interference field." But the coalition ships were moving constantly, dancing through space in patterns that the Covenant targeting systems could not predict. Human pilots flew with a recklessness that bordered on madness. They pushed their vessels through maneuvers that should have killed them, trusting their reflexes and their training to keep them alive for one more second. One more minute, the Thrax ships provided covering fire, their warriors finally facing an enemy worthy of their skills. The crystalline minds coordinated the entire operation. processing thousands of calculations per second to keep the interference field stable. For 6 hours, the battle raged. Coalition ships were destroyed one after another, their crews dying to buy time for the Valesi evacuation. But they kept fighting. They kept the interference field active. And slowly, impossibly, the planet killer began to fail. The weapon had been designed to destroy worlds. It's not to fight against an enemy that would not stay still. Its systems overloaded, trying to track hundreds of small, fast targets. Its weapons drew power that its shields needed to resist the interference field. Piece by piece, it began to break down. The final blow came from the Prometheus itself. Amara had been holding her ship in reserve, waiting for exactly the right moment. When the planet killer's shields finally collapsed, she drove her vessel straight at the weapon's central reactor. It was a suicide run. Everyone on the bridge knew it. But Amara had already made her choice. If humanity's return to the galaxy would be remembered for anything, it would be remembered for this moment. They had come to the stars not as conquerors, but as protectors. They would die as they had lived. Standing between innocent people and destruction, the Prometheus struck the planet killer's reactor at full speed. The explosion lit up the system like a new star. But Amara did not die. In the final seconds before impact, a crystalline mine vessel had intercepted the Prometheus and activated an experimental teleportation field. The technology was unstable and untested. It should not have worked. But it did. Amara and most of her crew materialized on the crystalline mine ship, dazed but alive. Behind them, the planet killer broke apart, its ancient systems finally overwhelmed. The Valesi homeworld was saved. 8 billion people who had been moments from death looked up at their sky and saw the burning wreckage of the weapon that had almost killed them. The Coalition had won its first battle. They had proven that the Covenant could be defeated. But Amara knew that this was only the beginning. High Arbiter Kos had escaped with most of his fleet. He would return with more weapons, more forces, more determination to restore the Covenant's absolute authority. The war was far from over, but something had changed in the galaxy. The younger species had seen that the gods could bleed. They had seen humans and Valesi and Thrax fight side by side against impossible odds. They had seen courage triumph over power. In the days that followed, more species joined the Coalition. Some came openly, declaring their break with the Covenant. Others came secretly, offering intelligence and resources while maintaining public neutrality. The cracks in the Covenant's authority were spreading. General Torres led ground forces in a campaign to secure Covenant's supply worlds. Outnumbered 50-1 on every battlefield, his soldiers used tactics that the Covenant had never encountered. They hid in shadows. They struck without warning. They turned the enemy's own weapons against them. The Covenant had never faced guerrilla warfare. They had never imagined that a weaker force could simply refuse to fight on the enemy's terms. Human soldiers taught their allies these techniques. And suddenly, the Covenant found themselves fighting shadows across 100 worlds. The turning point came when the crystalline mines made a formal announcement. They had observed the galaxy for billions of years without taking sides. Now, for the first time in their existence, they were choosing to act. "We have watched the Covenant maintain order through fear," they declared. "We have watched humanity inspire hope through courage. Between fear and hope, we choose hope." With the crystalline mines came technology that even the Covenant could not match. More importantly, they brought information. They knew secrets that the Covenant had hidden for millions of years. They knew the location of the Covenant homeworld, hidden from galactic maps since before recorded history. And they knew the truth about why the Covenant feared humanity. Amara listened to the crystalline mine's revelation with growing wonder. The answer to everything lay on that hidden world. The reason for the containment. The reason for the eliminated species. The reason why the gods of the galaxy trembled at the thought of a small species from a death world reaching for the stars. The war was about to enter its final phase. And when it ended, nothing would ever be the same. When the Deathworlders rose again, even the gods of the galaxy trembled. Part 5. the inheritance of stars. The Covenant homeworld was hidden in a region of space that official maps marked as empty. For millions of years, this world had been the source of the Covenant's power, the place where the 7 founding species had first come together to rule the galaxy. Now, for the first time in recorded history, outsiders were approaching its sacred space. Captain Amara Chen stood on the bridge of a new vessel, one built by the combined efforts of the Coalition. Human engineering merged with crystalline mind technology and Thrax weapon systems. It was a ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, crewed by beings from a dozen different species, working together in perfect harmony. The final battle had been brief and brutal. The Covenant fleet, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, had been worn down by months of guerrilla warfare and defections. Species that had served the Covenant for millions of years had abandoned them when they learned the truth about the imprisoned and eliminated civilizations. In the end, High Arbiter Kos commanded only a fraction of his former strength. He had fought to the last, determined to protect the secrets of his home world. He had died believing that he was saving the galaxy from a terrible threat. Amara had watched his ship burn and felt an unexpected sadness. Kos had been a monster, but he had been a monster who believed he was doing the right thing. Now the Coalition fleet descended through the atmosphere of the hidden world. What they found below was not what anyone had expected. The Covenant homeworld was beautiful. Gardens stretched across continents, filled with plants from 1,000 different worlds. Cities rose in graceful spirals, their architecture a testament to millions of years of civilization. Libraries contained the accumulated knowledge of countless species, but everything was built like a fortress. Every structure was designed to withstand assault. Every system had multiple failsafes. The gods of the galaxy had built their throne room expecting, one day, to face something they could not control. The remaining Covenant leaders waited in their council chamber. They did not resist when the Coalition forces entered. They simply sat in their ancient chairs and watched with tired eyes as their long reign came to an end. Elder Sirith, one of the few who had argued against the war, spoke first. "You have one, Captain Chen? The Covenant is finished. But before you pass judgment on us, there is something you must understand, something you must see." He led them through corridors that had not been opened in 12 million years, down into the deepest levels of the planet. The walls here were covered with markings in a language that no living species could read. The air was thick with the weight of ages. At the bottom, they found a vault. Its doors were sealed with technology so advanced that even the crystalline minds could not immediately comprehend it. But the seals had been designed to open when the time was right, and somehow they recognized the presence of humans among the group. The doors swung open, revealing a chamber filled with light. Inside was a message left by beings who had existed before the Covenant. Before any of the current galactic species had evolved, the crystalline minds called them the precursors. Though they had never known what these ancient entities had truly been, the message was simple and devastating. The precursors had reached a level of advancement beyond physical form. They had transcended the limitations of matter and energy, becoming something that existed beyond normal space and time. Before they departed the galaxy, they had left a prophecy. One day a species would arise from a death world. They would be forged in suffering and tempered by struggle. They would carry within them a spark of potential that exceeded even what the precursors had achieved. This species would face every possible obstacle and overcome them all. They would unite the galaxy not through conquest, but through inspiration. They would lead civilization to heights that could not yet be imagined. The Covenant had found this prophecy millions of years ago. They had understood that they were not the chosen ones, that their role in galactic history was merely to prepare the way for something greater. Some had accepted this with grace. Others had refused to believe it. The faction that refused had won the ancient debates. They had decided that if they could not be the ones to fulfill the prophecy, they would ensure that no one else could either. They had appointed themselves the guardians of galactic order, and they had systematically eliminated any species that matched the prophecy's description. Humanity had been the 18th species they had tried to contain. They were also the first to escape. Amara stood in the vault and felt the weight of the revelation settle over her. The Covenant had not imprisoned humanity out of simple fear of competition. They had genuinely believed they were protecting the galaxy from some unknown threat. They had been wrong, terribly wrong. But their fear had been real. She thought about all the suffering, all the death. All the civilizations that had been erased because of a prophecy written by beings who had vanished before any of the current species existed. It would be easy to hate the Covenant for what they had done. It would be easy to demand punishment and vengeance. But Amara had not brought humanity. This far by choosing the easy path, she turned to the remaining Covenant leaders, including Velith, who had risked everything to reveal the truth. You spent 12 million years trying to prevent this prophecy from coming true. You killed billions of innocent beings. You imprisoned my species for 3,000 years. The Covenant leaders braced themselves for condemnation, and I am asking you to help us make it come true. The council chamber fell silent. Even the crystalline minds seemed surprised. We did not come here for revenge, Amara continued. We did not fight this war to destroy you. We fought because we wanted to be free, and because we wanted to protect those who stood with us. Now, the war is over. We can spend the next 1,000 years punishing each other for past wrongs, or we can start building something better. She looked around the room at the faces of a dozen different species. Human, and Velesi, and Thrax, and Covenant, and Crystalline Mind. All of them watching her. All of them waiting. The prophecy says that a species from a death world would unite the galaxy. But prophecies do not tell us how things will happen. They only tell us that they can happen. We have a choice. We can be bitter and divided, or we can work together. I know what I choose. The Covenant leaders looked at each other. Some showed anger, unable to accept help from the species they had tried to destroy. But others, led by Velith and Elder Cirith, showed something different. Something like hope. The coalition that emerged from the Covenant homeworld was not an empire. It was a partnership. The Covenant's vast knowledge and technology was shared freely with all species. In return, humanity shared its greatest gift, the belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. Not everyone accepted the new order. Some Covenant hardliners fled to the edges of the galaxy, refusing to acknowledge the end of their supremacy. Some species remained suspicious of humanity, unable to believe that creatures from a death world could truly mean no harm. But the center held. Year after year, the coalition grew stronger. Trade routes opened between worlds that had never communicated before. Scientists from different species collaborated on projects that advanced technology faster than anyone had thought possible. Warriors who had once been enemies trained together and learned from each other. And humanity, the forgotten children who had been locked away for 3,000 years, found their place among the stars at last. Years later, Amara stood on a terraformed world at the edge of the galaxy. She was older now, her hair gray and her face lined with the marks of a life fully lived. Around her, a new generation prepared for a journey into the unknown. The crystalline minds had detected something at the boundary of the universe, a signal that might be the precursors, returning after millions of years. Or it might be something else entirely. Something new that no species had ever encountered. The exploration vessel being prepared for the journey was crewed by humans and Velesi and Thrax and reformed Covenant members and a dozen other species. They were not going as representatives of any single civilization. They were going as representatives of a united galaxy. Amara watched them board and felt at peace. She had not known was possible. 3,000 years ago, her ancestors had looked up at the stars and wondered why they were alone. Now their descendants were preparing to reach beyond the galaxy itself. A young officer approached her, a human woman who reminded Amara of herself at that age. Captain Chen, do you have any advice for us? Amara smiled. The same advice humanity has always followed. When you face the impossible, do not give up. When you meet something different, try to understand before you judge. When you have the chance to build something better, take it. The young officer nodded and jogged toward the vessel. The boarding ramp began to close. Amara watched the ship rise into the sky, carrying the hopes of a galaxy toward whatever waited beyond. She thought about high arbiter costs and the Covenant, about the prophecy and the precursors, about all the long journey that had brought them to this moment. 3,000 years ago, you locked us away because you feared what we might become, she murmured to the memory of the vanished gods. I wonder what you would think of us now. The ship disappeared into the stars. The future lay ahead, waiting to be written. And the Deathworlders, the forgotten children of Earth, were finally home.